Hi everyone, good afternoon, good evening, welcome, and thank you for joining our session, Driving Gender Inclusive Resilience with Impact-Linked Incentives. My name is Annika de Villiers, and I am the manager of the Impact-Linked Fund for Gender Inclusive FinTech at Roots of Impact. It's a long name, so in short, we just refer to the fund as the ILF for GIF or simply the GIF. We really want the session to be interactive and practical, so please feel free to drop your questions in the question box at any point throughout the session. We'll gather them for the Q&A session toward the end, and of course, you're also welcome to ask additional questions at that point. So to get us started, let me share a visual of how the ILF for GIF works. At its core, the ILF for GIF incentivizes fintechs to go beyond access and achieve gender transformative outcomes. We do this through a collaborative multi-stakeholder approach that brings together investment capital from partners such as Axion Ventures, technical assistance from gender experts such as Value for Women, and incentives from the ILF for GIF that directly reward the fintech for the positive gender impact that they achieve. And all of this is made possible by our funders. We are supported by the Swiss Development Corporation, the Austrian Development Agency, and FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. Our panelists today bring together complementary perspectives from the investor, a gender expert, and the entrepreneur itself to show how this collaboration can unlock practical, replicable solutions for inclusive resilience. So let me introduce our speakers. We have Katie Halloran, the head of Impact Partnerships and Programs at Axion Ventures, then Renee Hunter, the Associate Director of Advisory Services at Value for Women, and then Shehryar Bawani, the co-founder and CEO at Trukkr. And today we are proud to showcase how this partnership works with Trukkr to demonstrate how it works in practice. So let's get started with the investor perspective. Katie, Axion Ventures has been at the forefront of investing in inclusive fintechs globally. From your perspective, where do you see the biggest hurdles in access to finance, and what promising approaches are emerging that are helping move beyond access towards resilience? And specifically, what stood out about the Trukkr opportunity that made you excited to back them?
Thanks, Annika, and please move to the next slide. I'm just going to take folks through a little bit of a background to get to the place where I talk about how excited we are about Trukkr. So before diving into that, wanted to set the stage quickly on Axion Ventures' approach, who we are and what we believe, and then how Trukkr really exemplifies what we're trying to advance through our investment portfolio. So we invest globally in early stage fintechs with innovative models delivering financial services to underserved populations. And we're increasingly excited about models where micro and small businesses are the key stakeholder to solve for. The companies we invest in are offering services to these businesses, be it credit or supply chain integration services or workforce and benefits. And just to give you a sense of the impact in 2024, our portfolio companies reached over 12 million in combined customers and MSMEs. And we saw our portfolio companies extending over 4 billion in credit and processing over 1 billion in transactions. So you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So today we see technology is really driving access. The majority of the population now owns mobile phones, and fintechs are really offering services that leverage this growth in tech adoption and are surpassing the growth of incumbent players like banks. So back 10 years ago, when Axion Ventures started investing, only half the global population had a formal financial account. But over the last 10 years, we've seen that account ownership increase meaningfully by 20%. Still a big gap to solve for, over 1.3 to 1.6 billion, but we're moving in the right direction. And next slide, please. We also saw a nearly 30% jump in users making digital payments. And critical piece here in the fine print is that 42% are making digital payments to merchants, so beyond peer-to-peer transfers. Next slide. And then the trend continues with savings, right? Nearly 20% in people jump in people saving at formal financial institutions. So very positive growth there. And then finally, the next slide. But when we look at the case of borrowing from formal financial sources, we don't see the same growth. There was just a 10% increase over that 10-year horizon. And this is important because we know there's a massive credit gap for MSMEs, estimated at over 5 trillion. Go to the next slide. Thanks. This leads to Axion Ventures' belief around embedded finance, which we define as integrating financial services such as payments, lending, and insurance directly into non-financial platforms, allowing users to access services seamlessly, within their workflows, within the way that they're doing their business. And you can see this taking the financial services industry by storm, right? That $7.2 trillion number right there is the expected total market value of embedded finance by 2030. And this is more than the current value of all fintech startups and the top 30 global banks and insurers combined, just illustrating that there's so much scope for embedded finance. We see embedded finance not just as a business trend, but as a mechanism to extend services to underserved populations, particularly the small businesses left out of traditional financial systems. And again, looking at the enormous gap on the right-hand side, over $5 trillion in MSME credit gap and the low insurance adoption, where 88% lack the formal safety net of insurance. We believe embedded finance can help to close this gap, meeting people where they are doing business already. Right. So if you're a small merchant, maybe this is the WhatsApp channel you're using to order inventory via wholesalers. Or if you're an ag input seller, this is how you're accessing inventory and reaching smallholder farmers. Now you can access financing and better inventory. You can have more instant support with the digital channels, and you can avail more contextualized, affordable, and customized tools. And this is really, where we get excited about Trukkr. Trukkr is really a shining example of verticalized embedded finance, where financial services are tailored to the unique needs of a specific sector, in this case, logistics. So Trukkr, you'll hear from them, but they've created an app that Pakistan's trucking businesses can use to track trip-related expenses and invoices, and then use the in-platform data to underwrite financial services, including working capital loans, which are sorely needed. Trukkr is really meeting people where they are and managing their trucking operations and solving their financial needs in the same context. Next slide. So just to wrap up on our conviction, and our excitement around Trukkr, first was the customer profile. Trukkr found a way to reliably reach micro and small trucking companies that struggle with working capital needs. This segment aligns with the customers that we care about. The key innovation here, they serve both truckers and the corporations that hire them for distribution. So they created a two-sided marketplace there. They're not just serving truckers in isolation. They've built a platform that gives them the unique data access for better credit decisions. We're also encouraged by the sheer size of this market. Hundreds of thousands of MSME trucking companies in Pakistan, which ranks close to the bottom of the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, heavily reliant on analog tools and a cash-based economy. And we're lucky to have the founder, Shahryar, speaking here today. We were so impressed with the leadership of this team. They were thoughtful about growth, extremely well positioned with more than a decade of experience within Pakistan's logistics, supply chain, and finance and technology sectors. Today we're excited that Trukkr is providing millions of loans to MSME truckers in Pakistan. They've already captured over 10% of the country's SME trucking market. And I'll close with a note on resilience, since that's the theme of this year's Financial Inclusion Week. Despite the devastation from flooding in 2022, trucker demand for financing really increased, as the country leaned heavily on logistics players to move aid, food, and construction materials. We just see Trukkr as a clear, solution for resilience for MSMEs in the country. So that's just a nutshell on why we were excited about Trukkr and how it fits into our thesis.
Thanks so much, Katie. That was really insightful And I really like the connection that you drew between embedded finance and how this can lead to improved inclusion and resilience by really meeting people where they are. And the size of the market provides so many opportunities for deepening inclusion. So I'd like to hear from your perspective, what opportunities did you see for catalytic capital and partnerships like this to support in addressing those barriers and driving impact with Trukkr?
Yeah, for sure. We know that to transform access to quality financial service solutions for millions, we really needed to crowd in more investors, more operators, more philanthropic funders and experts into the fold. Catalytic capital is really core to how we at Axion Ventures achieve our theory of change around reaching, and delivering quality financial services. And we recognize that capital is not the only thing that startups need to achieve this impact. And in many ways, they need much more. So we ourselves, beyond our investments, we provide strategic and operational support that builds more resilient companies that can then scale and expand their impact. But critically, we intentionally build connections with the ecosystem and rely on highly specialized support providers like ILF for GIF and Value for Women that can really deepen the way customers are able to serve more marginalized customers. So I won't give away the ending here, but we were just so excited that Trukkr was came up as an opportunity for the ILF for GIF. And we weren't expecting it. And I think that was one of the reasons too why we were most excited here.
Thanks, Katie. I really resonated with what you said about capital not being the only aspect that enterprises need to reach the goals. And from our perspective, we were just so inspired by Trukkr's aspirations to lead by example and encourage more women into a sector despite all of the challenges that were facing them. Like you said, you were a little bit surprised that we wanted to work with them, but we saw just the large scope of additionality that could take place in this context. And that is a really great segue into the gender inclusion perspective, because partnerships like this, we believe, can only work when we very intentionally design for gender before incentivizing it. So that leads me to Renee. Value for Women works with fintechs and investors globally to integrate gender across business strategy and operations. And in your experience, what have been the additional hurdles that women face in sectors like logistics? Renee, we can't hear you right now. I think you might be muted.
Sorry about that. Let me start again. Yeah, thanks so much, Anika. And Katie, I completely resonate with what you said about, the importance of embedded finance. I think that speaks to why Trukkr was able to take such a transformative approach also from a gender perspective, because the fact of the matter is that specifically in logistics, long distance trucking in Pakistan, it wasn't actually even a matter of women being underrepresented, but largely absent. And yeah, this is due to a variety of different reasons. Obviously, the social and cultural norms were really very strong. This is just, and Sherry can attest to this also. It's just an industry that's incredibly masculine coded. The entire physical locational aspect, the truck stops, etc., are just it's only men that you see, and that especially in a very conservative ecosystem also means that it's just not considered a space that's even appropriate, let alone safe for women to navigate. And that then comes on top of additional very practical challenges around gender gaps in education, in driver's licenses, for example, and then obviously also from again from a social normative perspective, long distance trucking, being away overnight, long distances, the safety considerations. So to a large extent, it sometimes felt a little bit insurmountable to start thinking about how could we even start to bring more women into the mix. And I think I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. That's where I think Trukkr was so exciting to work with, in that it really was a market building exercise in a way, and not just a inclusion exercise necessarily.
That really highlighted to me the importance of context, the kinds of the structural and cultural barriers that you were describing are exactly why targeted design is so essential to ensure that we're meeting the fintech where they are at, similarly to how embedded finance meets the customer where they're at. And so when you think about inclusion and resilience, what are some of the key considerations to keep in mind when designing gender inclusive fintech solutions?
Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting when thinking about resilience is that it actually, to do in an authentic way, it actually requires the fintech provider or the financial service provider to think a little bit more broadly about what their role is and what their role could be in the life of the market and the customers that they serve. So from the perspective of Trukkr, obviously we were thinking about resilience. Okay, how can we safeguard the customer's earnings, for example? So obviously you start thinking about insurance. That's generally what we think about when it comes to resilience. But what was very interesting in this context, because we wanted to also be inclusive in our approach towards resilience, is to think more broadly. What are the factors that might cause a breakdown in resilience within the broader community, within families? So that's when we started thinking about, okay, how can we actually start bringing in broader insurance offerings that would also cover truck drivers' families in this regard. And that really required a bigger picture thinking. So I don't think there's one silver bullet necessary that can tell you, add this and stir, and your fintech solution will lead to more resilience. But I think that bigger, a broader framing of what could your role be in your market's lives is really important.
If only it was as easy as just add this ingredient and stir. But yeah, I think it is a great reminder as well that inclusion doesn't just happen. You have to build it into your framework, build it into your products, build it into your systems. And so looking at Trukkr's journey so far, what has stood out to you as meaningful steps that they have specifically taken to go beyond inclusion and towards empowerment and well-being of women?
Yeah, so first of all, I think just by virtue of the sector being so incredibly male-dominated, on the one hand, it sometimes can feel a little bit disheartening, and like the gap is too big to even start with. It also does mean that even a small number of visible women or included women already has a very strong signal in the market and in the community. So every individual woman almost had an outsized impact on even what the team considered to be possible within Trukkr. So that in and of itself were already some quite powerful steps. But beyond that, again, it comes back to taking a slightly broader vision of what your role is as a fintech or as a financial service provider. So for me, that really came into how Trukkr was thinking about the onboarding process for some of these new offerings. So incorporating engagement and awareness raising and a little bit of literacy in thinking about some of these new offerings, so that it wasn't just about reaching numbers, but making sure that you're changing the conversation. And I know that that's obviously still very much an ongoing process. So Cher, let me not go on too much there. But I think that, again, that broader vision for me was very key.
I think it's so interesting what you said about feeling like there was too much to do. But I think for us, with this fund, with this transaction, one of our key learnings and inspirations has really been that no change is too small. And something like designing your onboarding process with a gender inclusion lens might not sound like a very big step, but it can have very far rippling effects in terms of how your customers experience your products and your services, which I think is such a great lesson that we can all, and a key takeaway is that no change is too small. And so thank you, Renee, for giving us some context on how the intentional design could really lead to better outcomes. And now I'd love to hear from Trukkr themselves. So Shehryar, Trukkr has been addressing deep structural challenges in Pakistan's logistics sector, helping small operators digitize and access finance. And then through the work that you've been doing with the Impact Linked Fund for Gender Inclusive Fintech, looking at ways to extend this to women customers and to women in the sector as well. Before we get into the more gender aspects, I'd love to hear just from your customers' perspectives, what solutions have been the most effective in strengthening their resilience, and how has putting gender inclusion at the center shaped or reshaped your products and strategy?
Great. No, thank you so much. Yeah, I'd like to, I agree with sort of what Renee had said earlier, that the landscape in Pakistan for women's lending was almost non-existent. I mean, to say that there are barriers for women to borrow is like almost an understatement, because there's a huge trust deficit, even for women to approach financial institutions, because the system hasn't really supported them. But first, I want to talk about some of the solutions that we implemented in designing the product itself. I mean, the product that we had initially was a very standard product, because you have to sort of build a very standardized product in a market where there isn't a lot of generally the market that we operate in, which is logistics. There isn't a lot of education on financial products, so we had to make the product very simple. For example, your financing invoice, the tenors have to be well defined. Collateral, can be also very well defined. You have to have that. But when we decided to design a product for women, we had to, design something that would sort of help them get into the lending structure first, and be confident enough to avail those loans, and then sort of move towards a more structured approach. So, for instance, we opened it up for multiple kinds of collateral, including in some cases unsecured lending as well. We obviously, since our platform is digital, our approval processes are much faster. We had to make very fast turnaround times, and also, in terms of giving that support, we had to make maybe in some cases limited collateral as well, and of course, the kind of mentorship and support that we had to give to sort of educate that market. And as I said earlier, some of the things that the biggest issue was to start building the credibility, to give women the confidence that you could actually approach a financial institution and actually get commercial loans. Getting a loan, the solution itself is a loan, but because there wasn't a lot of approach to financial institutions, we had to first do a lot of sort of mentoring events and other partnerships on the ground to actually build that trust and confidence for women to actually apply, because that was even though we had built structures into our loans to support women to borrow, just bring them to the table was a big task itself. So putting gender inclusion has really helped our product, because as an embedded finance platform, for us it's very important that put simply, the better data that we have, the better our models become. And initially, status quo was that we built this platform, people apply to loans through it, we have the data so we can lend. But when we started, we accepted that status quo, that we're going to have data, but in reality 50% of the data was missing because women weren't applying. So once we decided that gender inclusiveness and equality is what we want on the platform, we started getting even better quality borrowers into the mix. And it's something that it sounds obvious, but it's something that we should have done in the first place, because the platform is now getting better. It's the more data you have, the better credit decisions the platform is going to make, because there's a whole subset of society that wants loans and wants to do business, but wasn't able to do it. So for us, we want to serve as that the catalyst to be able to do that. So putting that as a center focus has actually helped our platform as well.
Thanks, Shehryar. I found it so interesting what you said about the trust deficit needing to be overcome as one of the first steps. And I think you are doing amazing work in terms of being the catalyst, in being the start of the change in the sector. We are now 1 year into the transaction, the Impact Linked Finance transaction, and I'm curious to hear what movements or early shifts are you seeing among your customers, especially your women customers, and what lessons might there be that other fintechs could replicate from your experience? I'm specifically thinking as well, you mentioned some examples of how you've built the credibility to overcome the trust deficit. You mentioned mentoring and events. Perhaps you could elaborate on how you reached women to attend those events to ultimately bring them into the lending structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those two things go hand in hand. The ability to so there are two kinds of practices, and bringing them together, I think is the mix that works, and I think that is the mix that will help actually make our impact sustainable. So, for example, some of the things that I mentioned in terms of the structure of the products themselves, whether it be flexible collateral, allowing relatives also to cross guarantee and do all of these things, because a lot of times in Pakistan, even sometimes families are against other family members from borrowing and stuff like that. So those are issues that have to be overcome as well. So sort of the design, whether it be gender, intentional design for KYC, the way the credits are assessed, fintechs are looking at that and seeing that this is a model that they can also replicate. And some of what we've seen is that we've seen a shift, and very early, but we've seen a shift in terms of, in Pakistan, for example, microfinance borrowing has been there. It's been there for a while. Microfinance institutions have been sort of doing small micro lending, subsidized borrowing, but a lot of that was used for personal budgets. So, for example, if there's a shortfall in your personal budget, you might go to a microfinance institution and get a loan. And because microfinance institutions in Pakistan have that mandate, they're able to give those loans. But there's a big gap when it comes to commercial loans. So what we've done is that, because we reached out to universities, we reached out to organizations that support women, not with financial services, but other kinds of support, whether it be vocational training or other technical skills. We reached out to those and did joint events with them, did partnerships with them. And that led to women coming to us and being able to say, okay, we want to start a business that's logistics focused. We need this much money. And what's been great is there's been a signaling effect. I mean, there's been a couple of borrowers, and we were even surprised that have one or two borrowers that have in a year have built a business that is a national scale, and one has even has gotten international recognition. Her logistics business, which as was mentioned earlier, logistics is, men in Pakistan look at logistics as sort of they don't think women can be part of this industry. But this woman has taken a loan from us and proven that she can build a logistics business that has been funded now, equity funded by international VCs, and we're very proud of that. So that sort of signaling effect is going to cause more replication, because obviously it was a commercial loan, and and she sort of gotten a lot of spotlight, in the public eye and in the news. So I think it all started with that outreach with the institutions, then having women apply and actually seeing the success cases early on, which will form the basis for future such endeavors that others may also replicate.
Thanks, Shahryar. You mentioned some really practical points, such as gender intentional KYC design, and I really loved what you said about that you reached out to universities or other organizations that were already working with women. So you were meeting the women where they were at, which is quite a key theme that is emerging in this conversation. I also fully agree that the signaling effect is something Trukkr can be incredibly proud of. And I think those early signals of change are exactly what show the power of linking incentives and combining it with investment and TA to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. I am going to wrap up now with a few reflections from the fund before we'll move into some dedicated time that we have for questions and answers from the audience. I see we have a question in the chat box, but I really encourage you to add some more. We have some time set aside. From the fund's perspective, what we see this partnership as being so powerful is how the incentives can really transform the gender commitments from action plans to measurable outcomes to ensure that those goals come to life. The incentives can make sure that ambitions turn into action and that the impact really becomes tangible. For Trukkr, the incentives that we structured the transaction around were tied to progress across 3 key metrics, which we derived following the work that they did with Value for Women in developing a gender action plan. And the metrics were around recruiting more women employees, fostering a gender inclusive workplace, and then acquiring their first women-owned MSMEs as customers. And together, these metrics really create a holistic pathway for change, strengthening Trukkr's internal culture, but then at the same time expanding the market access for women entrepreneurs for commercial loans, as Trukkr, as Shahryar was mentioning. And with this structure, the GIF wanted to support Trukkr in paving the way for women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion in Pakistan, and the signaling effects and the aspects that Shahryar has already mentioned has shown that this is starting to come to life, as we are about a third of the way into the transaction. To keep the well-being at the center of the transaction, we also built some safeguards into the incentive mechanism. So we wanted to look at not just women being employed, but ensuring that they thrive. So for instance, tracking the women recruitment alongside a gender inclusive workplace with things like looking at employee satisfaction gaps. We also looked at not just onboarding women customers, but doing so responsibly. So maintaining loan sizes and default rates in line with men and embedding protection mechanisms. And then because resilience goes beyond just access. We added a fourth metric focused on insurance products that Renee also mentioned, helping the women customers really strengthen their financial stability. And so through this one transaction, we're already seeing how incentives can align business success with gender impact. As Sheriar mentioned, now that they're starting to see the results, they see that it should have done it long ago, or it makes commercial sense for them to do it as well. So that wraps up our panel session for now, and really a big thank you to the panelists for your perspectives. I'll move on for now to the questions from the audience. We only have one question so far. We'll start with that one, but please post any additional questions that you may have in the chat box. So the question that has come through, Renee, I would love to get your opinion on. In terms of technical support of fintechs offering solutions, such as logistics for Trukkr, a typically male-dominated service, is there similarly an opportunity for interventions on customer side to incentivize women's uptake, and how feasible is that?
Yes, good question. I think the short answer is yes. And we see this regularly with our clients, financial service providers across different sectors. What you'll often find, and that actually ties in very nicely, Anika, to what you were just saying about the importance of this partnership, is depending on the sector, especially if it's in a case like Trukkr, where women weren't just underrepresented but largely absent, you do need to generally invest in reaching, or in this case, building this customer segment. So, incentivize women's uptake, right? In this case. So that is an investment that's required. The way that I often see it is it's kind of similar to any kind of priority market segment that you would want to reach. You will invest in making sure that you reach them, right? So you identify which are your priority segments that make most business sense for you, and you will dedicate the cash to reach them in whatever way makes sense. So that is an upfront investment, but what we see time and time again, as I said, across different sectors, is that generally your women customers tend to be your better repayers, tend to be very loyal, tend to be very strong in their referrals. So it actually has quite an outsized impact on the additional customers that you would reach. Obviously, I'm generalizing quite a bit here, but that's what we tend to see. So as much as there's an upfront investment, it's a market segment that is very much worthwhile investing in reaching. And coming back to this kind of partnership, that's the beauty of the IL for JIF in this instance, because even in markets where it might feel like the gap is insurmountable, or you really have to build this market to an extent, some of those financial incentives that are built into the impact-linked incentives help bridge that initial investment hurdle. So I can't give you any more specific details on which interventions might work best, because that really depends on the sector and the market. But to your question, how feasible is this? Generally, yes, but you need to be intentional about it.
Thanks, Renee. I think another theme that has emerged is that change needs to be intentional. And as you mentioned, change also needs investment. And this is where a partnership such as this can combine the investment from an impact investor, but then also incentives to really help in overcoming those initial barriers and those resource constraints that are needed upfront. Because as you mentioned, Renee, once there is sufficient scale, it becomes commercially feasible to continue and to grow that business and to grow the reach of women. I'd also love to hear from you, Renee. Was there, in your work that you're doing with Trukkr, if you felt that there was a specific moment in which the perspective shifted among Trukkr staff around what might be possible. We've spoken quite a bit about how it seemed insurmountable. So was there a moment, and what was it?
Great. I'm going to actually ask Shara to validate whether or not this was your experience also. But what I remember quite distinctly is this is now not on the market side, but on the Trukkr team side. We were also looking at, as you mentioned, Anika, quite a holistic approach. So how do we also try to bring more women into the team in some of the the office-based roles, some of the technical roles, some of the finance roles, where again, it was a space that was very male dominated. And when we were engaging with the HR team on the Trukkr side, it kind of felt as if the team was open, saying, yeah, sure, let's try. But over the years that we've definitely been open to, hiring, and we've wanted to hire women into these roles, we have just never received meaningful applications. So the number of CVs that we receive are negligible. So, what must we do? So we worked with them on some of their recruitment strategies, the channels they used, the way in which the job descriptions were written up. And I distinctly remember one conversation we had with the HR team after they'd recently released a new job description that simply stated, Trukkr is an equal opportunity employer and really encourages women to also apply for this role. And the HR team was honestly baffled to see that simple change already increased. They received more women's CVs than they had ever before. And that was quite a pivotal moment, I think, for us. And they realized, oh, actually, we thought that this was a non-starter, but there are small things that we can do. And all of a sudden, we're seeing this big change. So I think for me, that was quite a pivotal moment. But yeah, Shara, I saw you laugh. Does that align with what you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you are aware that when we started Trukkr, we were 100% male workforce, and it's quite embarrassing because obviously it's not. That's a pretty unpleasant workplace, to be honest. And you're also in terms of but on a serious note, it's crazy how some of these simple things, it's like a foregone conclusion that in Pakistan that women are not going to be in the workplace, in a lot of workplace. So people don't even bother doing these small changes. And we've seen, as you said, the result of small changes bring many CVs. In the beginning, when the idea was floated that we need to hire women, people are looking at each other as if it's the most difficult task that they've been asked to do, And now, 1 year later, it's no question, right? It's understood that you're gonna, every job listing will have men and women applicants, and that's happening. You're getting CVs because of some of the things that you guys have suggested. These changes to put into our some of our hiring policies, and that's made a big difference.
My key takeaway from this conversation has been that it is the simple things, the small things, that can be an incredible catalyst for change and for transformation. This has been such a great conversation, but I'm aware of the time, so I'll wrap it up. Big thank you to Katie, to Renee, and to Shariar for your engaging contributions. And to the audience, I hope that today's conversation has sparked some ideas on how a multi-stakeholder approach and embedding incentives can build not just access, but true resilience and inclusion. And let's keep collaborating to make these solutions scalable and really replicable across markets. Thank you again for joining us at Financial Inclusion Week 2025, and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you, everyone.